My husband held me down while his mistress cut my hair. Those were the last words she whispered before she stopped remembering how to breathe. The moment had happened hours earlier, yet the sting of the razor slicing through her braids still pulsed behind her eyes. He had dragged her into the living room, the same room where she once cooked his favorite meals, and held her wrists down while the other woman, sneering with victory, dug the blade through every part of her hair she could reach. Her pregnancy made her weak. Her belly tightened painfully as she struggled, but the betrayal cut deeper than any blade. He didn't look away. He didn't blink. He let her be humiliated, as if she were nothing but a burden he had been waiting to discard. When it was over, the mistress tossed the braided clumps onto the floor like trash, each one landing with a soft thud that echoed louder than any scream she could have released. She made one phone call. What happened next destroyed them both. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever felt alone when you needed help most, you need to watch this story until the very end. What her brothers did will shock you, but what she became will inspire you. Don't skip ahead. Every chapter matters. And if you believe justice should always find those who think they're untouchable, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss what happens next. Cale rose to his feet, brushing off his hands as though touching her had contaminated him. "Get out," he said, his voice flat and final. There was no anger in it, no emotion at all, just cold dismissal. He called her a parasite, insisted the baby wasn't his, insisted she had ruined his future. Every word landed like a stone against her chest. She tried to speak, tried to ask how the man she married could become this stranger. But he didn't wait for answers. He shoved her toward the door, her body stumbling against the wall, and then she was outside. The door slammed so hard the window shook, and rain drenched her immediately, soaking through her hospital sandals and dripping into her torn clothes. She stood there on the empty street, shivering, her hand instinctively moving to her belly, as if to shield the baby from the cruelty that had just unfolded. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and scrolled through her contacts. Maya blocked. Nadia blocked. Sana blocked. One by one, every name she tried returned the same cold message. Cale had already severed every connection she had, isolating her so completely that even the act of reaching out felt like clawing at walls that wouldn't move. The rain poured harder, washing over the patches where her hair had been ripped away, and she pressed her hand tighter against her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the life inside her. But sorry it wasn't a shelter. Sorry it wasn't safe. Sorry was just another word drowning in the storm. She scrolled further, past the blocked names, past the empty spaces where friends used to be, until she saw it. Arion, her eldest brother. The one Cale convinced her hated her. The one he said would never forgive her for choosing him over family. Her thumb hovered over the screen. What if Cale was right? What if Arion refused her too? What if this was the final rejection that shattered what little remained of her? But she had nowhere else to go, no one else to call, no other choice. So she typed, her fingers shaking so badly the words came out broken. "Arion, I need help. Please." She hit send before fear could stop her, then stared at the screen, watching the rain blur the letters. 1 minute passed. Then 2. She told herself he wouldn't answer. He was probably asleep. He probably deleted her number years ago. He probably moved on from the sister who vanished into a man's lies. But then her phone buzzed. A message. Her heart lurched as she opened it, her vision blurring with rain and tears. "Little sister, where are you?" 3 words. That's all it took. Her knees buckled, and she sank down onto the wet pavement, clutching the phone like it was the only solid thing left in the world. For the first time that night, she let herself cry, not the silent tears she swallowed in Cale's house, but raw, gasping sobs that tore through her chest. She typed her location with shaking hands, each letter a struggle. Maple and 4th. He kicked me out. I have nowhere to go. The reply came within seconds. Stay exactly where you are. Do not move. I'm coming now. Amina wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly as the rain continued its assault. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't know how Arion would find her or what he would say when he saw her like this. Broken, humiliated, unrecognizable. But something inside her shifted. A tiny flicker of hope she thought had died hours ago. She pressed her hand to her belly again, this time not in apology, but in promise. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. She didn't know if it was true, but she needed to believe it. Then she heard it, a sound cutting through the rain, growing louder with each passing second. The deep, rhythmic thrum of helicopter blades slicing through the night sky. Amina looked up, rainwater streaming down her face, and saw lights piercing through the storm. Her heart pounded. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her brothers were coming. And when they arrived, everything would change. The helicopter descended, its blades whipping the rain into wild spirals, and through the blur she saw a figure stepping out. Arion, tall, steady, his expression carved from stone and fury. Behind him came two more, Zephyr and Cade. They moved toward her with purpose, their eyes scanning her shaking frame as if assessing damage to something precious. Arion reached her first, kneeling down in the rain, without hesitation. "Little sister," he said, his voice breaking just slightly. "I've got you now." At that moment, something inside Amina shifted. She didn't know it yet, but her entire world was about to change. Arion arrived first, stepping out of the helicopter with a rage so cold it made the air feel thinner. His eyes found Amina immediately, and for a split second, something cracked in his expression, something raw and unguarded, before the stone mask returned. Behind him came Zephyr and Cade, their faces carved with fury, held barely beneath the surface, their movements sharp and deliberate as they assessed the damage done to their sister. Amina sat huddled on the wet pavement, her torn clothes clinging to her shivering frame, her hair jagged and uneven where the razor had carved through it. She looked small in a way that made Arion's jaw tighten. He crossed the distance in seconds, kneeling in the rain beside her, without hesitation. "We're here now," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Zephyr wrapped a thick blanket around her shoulders before she could speak, tucking it gently around her trembling body. Cade crouched down, his eyes scanning her face, her hands, the patches on her scalp, memorizing every detail like a man cataloging evidence for war. None of them asked what happened. They didn't need to. The truth was written across her in bruises, exhaustion, and fear. "Can you stand?" Zephyr asked softly, extending his hand. Amina nodded, though her legs wobbled as she tried to rise. Arion steadied her with one arm while Cade supported her other side, and together they guided her toward the helicopter. The blades roared above them, drowning out the rain, drowning out the world. Amina had just escaped. She glanced back once at the empty street, half expecting Cale to appear, to shout after her, to drag her back into the nightmare. But there was nothing, just rain and darkness, and the fading silhouette of a life she no longer belonged to. As they lifted her into the aircraft, she felt the weight of the night pressing down on her chest, threatening to crush whatever strength she had left. But Zephyr's hand closed over hers, firm, steady, certain. "You're safe now," he said, and the certainty in his voice cracked open the first tear she had shed since they arrived. Inside the helicopter, the world became muffled. The roar of the blades surrounded them, but inside the cabin, there was only stillness. Amina sat wrapped in blankets, staring at her reflection in the window. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. Her hair was butchered, her eyes hollow, her spirit so fractured she wasn't sure how to piece it together again. She couldn't bring herself to meet her brother's eyes. She expected judgment, disappointment, maybe even blame for disappearing into Cale's lies for so long. But when she finally glanced up, what she saw wasn't anger, it was grief. Arion sat across from her, his hands clenched into fists, his gaze fixed on her as though he was afraid she might vanish if he looked away. Zephyr watched her carefully, his expression unreadable, but his presence protective. Cade said nothing, but his silence carried more weight than words. He was memorizing her injuries, mental, physical, emotional, like a man preparing evidence for a reckoning. "I didn't know where else to go," Amina whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the helicopter. Ariane leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "You should have called us 2 years ago," he said, his voice low but not unkind. "But you're here now. That's all that matters." She shook her head, tears spilling over. "He told me you hated me. He said you all wanted nothing to do with me because I chose him." Zephyr's jaw tightened. "And you believed him?" There was no accusation in his tone, only pain. Amina looked down at her hands. "He made me believe a lot of things." Cade finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with something dangerous. "Did he put his hands on you?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Amina hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Not the way you're thinking. He held me down while her voice broke. She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. The brothers exchanged a glance, and in that silent communication, a decision was made. Whatever Cale had done, whatever he thought he could get away with, he had miscalculated. Badly. The helicopter descended smoothly onto the landing pad of Ariane's estate, a sprawling property nestled far from a city, far from prying eyes, far from the chaos Amina had just escaped. The moment they touched down, medical staff were waiting. Ariane had called ahead, arranging everything before they even landed. Amina was ushered out of the helicopter and into the estate, her brothers flanking her like sentinels. She wanted to protest, to say she was fine, but the truth was she wasn't fine. Her body ached. Her mind felt fractured. And the baby, she pressed her hand to her belly, panic rising. "The baby," she said urgently, looking at Ariane. "I need to make sure the baby is okay." He nodded immediately. "The doctors are ready. They'll check everything." She was taken directly to a private medical wing, a quiet room filled with soft light and sterile efficiency. Doctors examined her while nurses tended to her wounds, cleaning the cuts on her scalp, checking her vitals, and running tests to confirm the baby's health. Amina lay on the examination table, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the fact that she was no longer on that street, no longer trapped in Cale's house, no longer alone. The doctor, a kind woman with gentle hands, smiled at her. "The baby's heartbeat is strong," she said. "Everything looks stable." Relief washed over Amina, so intensely it nearly weakened her again. She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely now. Her baby was okay. Despite everything, despite the terror and the violence and the rain, her baby was okay. Outside the examination room, her brothers stood guard. Ariane paced, his mind already working through the pieces of a puzzle he hadn't fully understood until tonight. Zephyr leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression dark. Cade stood by the door, silent and watchful, his thoughts moving like gears behind his eyes. "We need to know everything," Ariane said quietly. "Every detail, every lie, every theft." Zephyr nodded. "I'll start pulling records. Bank accounts, transactions, anything with her name on it." Cade's voice was cold. "And we need to know who else knew, who helped him, who stayed silent." Ariane turned to face them, his eyes hard. This wasn't just cruelty. This was calculated. He isolated her on purpose, broke her down piece by piece until she had nowhere left to turn. Zephyr's fists clenched, and then he threw her out like garbage. Cade's jaw tightened. He made a mistake. Ariane's gaze was steel. He made several. And he's about to learn what it costs to hurt someone we love. When Amina finally emerged from the examination room, exhausted but stable, her brothers were waiting. Ariane stepped forward, his expression softening just slightly. "The baby?" he asked. She nodded, managing a weak smile. Strong heartbeat. Everything stable. Relief flickered across all three of their faces. Zephyr exhaled slowly. Cade's shoulders relaxed just a fraction. Ariane reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. "You're going to rest now. Real rest. No one can reach you here. No one can hurt you here." She looked up at him, tears welling again. "I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head. "You don't need to thank us, Amina. You're our sister. We should have found you sooner." She was taken to a guest suite, a room filled with soft light and quiet comfort. A nurse helped her into clean clothes, brushed what remained of her hair gently, and brought her warm tea. Amina sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the estate grounds bathed in moonlight. For the first time in what felt like years, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't waiting for the next insult, the next betrayal, the next moment Cale would tear her down. She was simply here, safe, surrounded by people who hadn't forgotten her. And as she lay down, pulling the covers over herself, one thought settled into her mind with quiet certainty. Cale had no idea what was coming. He thought he had won. He thought she had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, no power left. But he was wrong. And the brothers, who now stood guard outside her door, were about to show him just how wrong he was. Amina woke in a room filled with sunlight, though her heart still felt heavy with darkness. She sat up slowly, her body aching in places she hadn't noticed the night before, trying to remember how to exist in a space where her pain wasn't being monitored, mocked, or weaponized. The sheets were soft against her skin, the air smelled faintly of lavender, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back, the rain, the helicopter, her brothers' faces carved with fury and grief. She was safe. The realization brought relief, so intense it nearly weakened her again. A nurse entered quietly, carrying a tray of breakfast, and smiled gently. "Good morning, Miss Amina. The baby's vitals are still strong. You're doing well." Amina nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. The baby was stable. That single fact anchored her when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. After eating, she stepped out into the hallway and found her brothers waiting. They stood together near the window overlooking the estate grounds, speaking in low voices that stopped the moment they saw her. Ariane turned first, his expression softening just slightly. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Amina shrugged, not trusting her voice yet. Zephyr gestured toward a nearby sitting room. "We need to talk. There are things you need to know." Her stomach tightened. She followed them into the room, settling onto a chair while they remained standing, their postures tense with barely contained anger. Ariane pulled out a tablet and placed it on the table in front of her. "We've been digging into Cale's finances," he said carefully. "And what we found," he paused, his jaw tightening. "Amina, he's been stealing from you. For months." The words didn't register at first. She stared at him, waiting for clarification, but his expression didn't change. "Stealing," she repeated slowly. Zephyr nodded. "Your personal savings account. The one your grandmother left you. He drained it. Every cent." Amina felt the air leave her lungs. Her grandmother's money, the nest egg she had carefully protected, the inheritance meant to secure her future, gone. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I would have noticed. I check that account regularly." Cade spoke up, his voice calm but edged with something cold. "He forged your signature on bank documents, transferred funds to accounts you didn't know existed. Some of your grandmother's jewelry was sold too. Pieces you probably thought were still in storage." Amina's hands began to shake. She remembered asking Cale about her grandmother's pearl necklace months ago, the one she wanted to wear for a family photo. He told her it was being cleaned, that he'd pick it up soon. She never saw it again. "How much?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Ariane hesitated. "Close to $80,000. Maybe more. We're still tracing everything." The number hit her like a physical blow. $80,000. Her entire safety net, the money she planned to use for the baby, for emergencies, for starting over if she ever needed to, stolen. By the man who promised to protect her. Zephyr continued, his tone measured but firm. "It gets worse. He funneled large sums into Leora's projects. Fashion campaigns, business ventures, things he claimed were investments. He used your money to fund her dreams while telling you there wasn't enough for yours." Amina felt bile rise in her throat. Every time she asked Cale about starting her own business, he told her they couldn't afford it. Every time she mentioned going back to school, he said money was tight. Meanwhile, he was draining her accounts to elevate the woman who would eventually humiliate her with a razor. "Did he plan this from the beginning?" she asked, her voice cracking. Cade's expression darkened. We found messages between Kale and a friend. They go back almost a year. Coordinated efforts to isolate you from us, from your friends, from anyone who might question what he was doing. He needed you to be dependent, controllable, alone. Amina closed her eyes, trying to process the depth of the betrayal. It wasn't just cruelty. It wasn't just manipulation. It was systematic destruction, executed with precision and patience. She had loved him, trusted him, built a life with him, and he had been dismantling her piece by piece, waiting for the moment she would have nothing left. Why, she whispered. Why would he do this? Ariane knelt down in front of her, his eyes meeting hers. Because people like Kale don't see love as partnership. They see it as ownership. And when you stopped being useful, when the baby made things complicated, he decided to discard you. Zephyr's voice was tight with anger. He thought you had no one, no family, no resources, no way to fight back. That's why he isolated you so completely. He wanted you powerless. Amina felt something inside her shift, something harder, sharper, more solid than the heartbreak that had been drowning her. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't blind. She had simply believed in love that never truly existed. But now, with the truth laid bare in front of her, she understood. Kale hadn't just broken her heart. He had tried to erase her entirely. And he almost succeeded. What happens now? She asked, looking up at her brothers. Ariane stood, his expression resolute. Now we make sure he pays for every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every lie. We're filing reports with the authorities. We're freezing accounts. We're recovering what we can. Kate added, and we're making sure he never gets near you again. Zephyr pulled up something on his phone and showed it to Amina. Her breath caught. It was a photo posted online, Kale and Leora, smiling at a restaurant. Champagne glasses raised, the caption reading, "New beginnings with my love." The post was from last night, hours after he threw Amina out into the rain. She stared at the image, feeling a strange numbness settle over her. They were celebrating. While she sat on a cold street, broken and bleeding, they were toasting their future. Leora wore a necklace Amina recognized, her grandmother's pearls. The ones Kale said were being cleaned. Zephyr's voice was quiet but fierce. They think they won. They think you're gone, forgotten, erased. They have no idea what's coming. Amina looked at the photo for a long moment, then handed the phone back. Good, she said softly. Let them celebrate. Let them think they got away with it. She met Ariane's eyes, and for the first time since arriving, her voice carried weight. Because when the truth catches up to them, I want them to remember this moment. I want them to remember how confident they felt right before everything fell apart. Ariane smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. That's my sister. Cade nodded approvingly. Zephyr crossed his arms, satisfaction flickering across his face. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of what was coming settling over them like a storm gathering strength. Amina stood slowly, her legs steadier than they had been the night before. She walked to the window and looked out at the estate grounds, the sunlight spilling over manicured gardens and distant trees. Somewhere out there, Kale was living his best life, believing he had escaped consequences, believing Amina would fade into nothing. But he was wrong, and the reckoning he never saw coming was already in motion. She turned back to her brothers, her expression calm but resolute. I want to know everything. Every account he touched. Every lie he told. Every person who helped him. Ariane nodded. We'll give you every detail. She took a breath, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Control. Not over Kale, not over the past, but over her own future. Then let's begin. And in that moment, surrounded by the brothers who refused to let her fall, Amina made a choice. She wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to fade. She wasn't going to let Kale's cruelty define the rest of her life. She had been buried alive in someone else's lies, but the soil was shifting now, and she was rising again. Her brothers were determined to clear the path ahead of her, but she knew the truth. She would have to walk it herself. And she would. One step at a time, she would reclaim everything Kale tried to steal. Starting now. Kale was not celebrating as loudly as he pretended. Beneath the captions and filters, beneath the carefully staged photos. With Leora draped across his arm, he felt a gnawing fear he couldn't shake. Amina was gone, truly gone, and a small part of him knew he had made a mistake far larger than humiliation videos and stolen bank accounts. He stared at his phone screen, scrolling through the comments under their celebration post, but the words blurred together. Something felt off, like he had tampered with the wrong life, like he had crossed a line he didn't fully understand. Leora noticed his distraction and leaned closer, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What's wrong, baby? You're not having second thoughts about her, are you?" Kale shook his head quickly. "No, of course not. He paused, searching for words that wouldn't make him sound weak. "I'm just making sure she doesn't try anything stupid." Leora laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "What could she possibly do? She has no one, Kale. No money, no friends, no family, who cares? She'll crawl back eventually, begging for another chance. They always do." Kale wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered that he had underestimated something crucial. The first sign of trouble appeared 2 days later. Kale tried to access his primary business account and found it frozen. He stared at the screen, confusion quickly morphing into panic. He refreshed the page, thinking it was a glitch, but the message remained. Account temporarily restricted pending investigation. His hands trembled as he called the bank, his voice tight with forced calm. "There's been some mistake. My account is frozen. I need it unlocked immediately." The representative's tone was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kale, but your account has been flagged for suspicious activity. We're working with authorities to review recent transactions. You'll need to speak with our fraud department." Kale's throat tightened. "Fraud? There's no fraud. This is my money." The representative didn't waver. "We'll be in touch once the review is complete. Have a good day." The line went dead. Kale stood frozen, phone still pressed to his ear, his mind racing. How was this possible? Who flagged his account? He tried another account, same result. Then another. Frozen. Restricted. Under review. Panic clawed at his chest. Leora walked into the room, her expression already sour. "My agent just canceled 3 contracts," she said, her voice rising with frustration. "3 major deals, Kale. They're citing reputational risk." "What the hell does that even mean?" Kale didn't answer. He was too busy scrolling through his emails, watching as messages from business partners piled up, each one more urgent than the last. "We need to meet immediately. Concerns have been raised about recent transactions. Investors are requesting a full audit." His phone buzzed with a call from his business partner, Marcus. Kale answered quickly. "Marcus, what's going on?" "My accounts are frozen," and Marcus cut him off, his tone clipped and cold. "I don't know what you did, Kale, but you need to fix it. Fast. People are asking questions I don't have answers to. Questions about missing funds, forged documents, unauthorized transfers. This is bad." Kale's stomach dropped. "I didn't do anything wrong. This is a misunderstanding." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "Then you better clear it up before it buries all of us. I'm distancing myself until you sort this out." The line went dead. Kale stared at his phone, feeling the walls closing in. Leora's voice broke through his spiral. "Kale, what is happening? Why are people suddenly treating us like criminals?" He looked at her, anger flashing in his eyes. "I don't know, Leora. Maybe because you convinced me to throw my pregnant wife out into the street and publicly humiliate her." Leora's face twisted with indignation. "Don't you dare put this on me. You wanted her gone just as much as I did. You said she was holding you back, remember? You said she was nothing." Kale ran his hands through his hair, pacing the room. "I didn't think," he stopped himself. He didn't think what? That there would be consequences? That someone would notice? That Amina had people who actually cared about her? Leora crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "Fix this, Kale. Whatever you did, undo it. I'm not losing everything because you couldn't cover your tracks." He spun toward her, fury rising. "You think I planned this? You think I wanted my accounts frozen and my business falling apart? She stepped closer, her eyes hard. I think you got sloppy. And now we're both paying for it. Cale grabbed his phone and tried calling Amina's old number, desperate for some semblance of control. The call didn't go through. Number disconnected. He tried again. Same result. Panic surged through him. Where was she? Who was helping her? He thought she had no one, no resources, no way to fight back. But someone was moving against him with precision and power, and he couldn't see who. Leora watched him spiral, her own fear growing. What if she went to the police? She asked quietly. Cale's head snapped up. She wouldn't. She has no proof of anything. Leora's voice rose. You stole from her, Cale. You forged her signature. If she has records, if someone helped her find the transactions, she didn't finish. The implication hung in the air like a noose tightening. Cale sat down heavily, his mind racing through every decision, every transfer, every lie. He had been so careful, so calculated. How was this falling apart so quickly? His phone buzzed again. An email from his lawyer. Cale, we need to meet. I've received inquiries from law enforcement regarding financial irregularities associated with your name. Do not speak to anyone until we talk. Cale's blood ran cold. Law enforcement. The words echoed in his mind, growing louder with each repetition. This wasn't just frozen accounts or canceled contracts. This was a criminal investigation. He looked at Leora, his voice barely above a whisper. They're coming for me. She stared at him, her face pale. Who? Who's coming for you? He shook his head, unable to answer. He didn't know. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembered the way Amina had looked that night. Broken, humiliated, defeated. He remembered how easily she had crumbled under his words, how completely she had believed his lies. He had assumed she would stay broken. He had assumed she had no one to turn to. But what if he was wrong? What if the woman he threw away like garbage had people powerful enough to dismantle his life piece by piece? The thought sent ice through his veins. Leora paced the room, her voice frantic. We need to leave. Go somewhere they can't find us. Start over. Cale laughed bitterly. With what money, Leora? Everything is frozen. We have nothing. She stopped, realization dawning on her face. They were trapped. The empire they built on stolen funds and arrogance was collapsing, and there was nowhere left to run. Cale's phone buzzed one more time. A message from an unknown number. He opened it, his hands shaking. The message was simple, just 4 words. You made a mistake. No signature. No explanation. Just cold certainty. Cale stared at the screen, his heart pounding. Who sent this? How did they get his number? He wanted to respond, to demand answers, but his fingers wouldn't move. Because deep down he knew. He had made a mistake. A catastrophic, irreversible mistake. He had underestimated the woman he destroyed. He had underestimated the people who loved her. And now, as his world crumbled around him, he realized something terrifying. He had no idea who he was really fighting. Amina was gone, vanished into a life he couldn't access, protected by forces he couldn't see. And the cracks in his throne were widening into chasms he would never be able to cross. Leora's voice pulled him back. Cale, say something. What are we going to do? He looked at her, seeing for the first time how fragile their alliance truly was. She wasn't loyal. She was opportunistic. And the moment things got worse, she would abandon him without hesitation. He was alone, truly alone. And somewhere out there, the people he wronged were just getting started. Amina began healing slowly. Every morning brought a little more strength, a little more color in her cheeks, a little more presence in her voice. Her hair had begun to grow in, uneven but soft, a quiet reminder of both what she endured and what she survived. She spent afternoons walking through Arion's gardens, the sunlight warm on her skin, the sound of birds filling the air with something she had almost forgotten. Peace. Evenings were for journaling, writing out the thoughts that tangled in her mind, giving words to feelings she had suppressed for so long. And nights, finally, were for sleeping without fear. No more listening for footsteps. No more bracing for insults. No more wondering when the next betrayal would come. Her brothers hovered protectively but respectfully, giving her space while standing close enough that she never felt alone again. It was a balance she didn't know she needed until she had it. She attended therapy 3 times a week, sitting across from Dr. Mensah, a woman whose calm presence made it easier to unpack the weight Amina had been carrying. "Tell me about the moment you realized something was wrong," Dr. Mensah said during one session. Amina thought for a long time before answering. "I don't think there was one moment. It was gradual. Like watching a sunset. You don't notice how dark it's getting until suddenly you can't see anymore." Dr. Mensah nodded. "And when did you start to see again?" Amina's voice was soft but steady. "When my brother answered the phone. When I realized I wasn't as alone as Kale made me believe." The sessions were hard, pulling up memories she wanted to bury, forcing her to confront how deeply manipulation had rooted itself into her sense of self. But with each conversation, each breakthrough, she felt lighter, stronger, more like the woman she used to be before Kale convinced her she was nothing. Her brothers kept her updated on the progress of their investigation, though they were careful not to overwhelm her. Ariane met with financial advisors, reviewing the reports compiled from months of digging. He sat with Amina one afternoon, spreading documents across the table. "We've recovered about 60% of what he took," Ariane said, his tone measured. "The rest is tied up in accounts we're still tracing. It'll take time, but we'll get it back." Amina looked at the numbers, each one representing a piece of her life Kale had stolen. She cried over the stolen inheritance, over the forged documents, over the way she had vanished from her own life for so long. But each tear carried weight out of her body, making room for something steadier, sharper, and more grounded. Zephyr entered the room, holding his laptop. "You need to see this," he said, his expression tight. He turned the screen toward Amina. It was a news article. The headline read, "Local businessman under investigation for financial fraud." Kale's name was front and center, his smug photo from a corporate event staring back at her. The article detailed frozen accounts, suspicious transactions, and ongoing inquiries by law enforcement. Amina read it slowly, her emotions swirling between vindication and emptiness. "How do you feel?" Zephyr asked carefully. Amina set the laptop down, her voice quiet. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel satisfied. But I just feel." She paused, searching for the word. "Tired." Ariane placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's normal. You're not obligated to celebrate his downfall. You're allowed to just focus on yourself." She nodded, grateful for the permission to feel whatever she felt without judgment. Cade walked in, his expression unreadable as always. Police came to his door this morning, asked him to come in for questioning. Amina's stomach tightened, and Cade's lips curved into a faint, cold smile. He refused. Lawyered up immediately, which only makes him look worse. Zephyr leaned back in his chair. Leora's distancing herself publicly. She released a statement claiming she had no knowledge of his activities. Threw him under the bus to save herself. Amina wasn't surprised. Leora's loyalty had always been conditional, built on convenience rather than connection. "What about his business partners?" she asked. Ariane's tone was satisfied. "Most have severed ties. The ones still involved are scrambling to cover their own tracks. Kale's reputation is destroyed." Amina absorbed the information, feeling a strange detachment. This was the man who once controlled every aspect of her life, who made her feel small and worthless, who stole her money and her dignity. Now he was scrambling, desperate, facing consequences he never believed would reach him. She realized she was not simply recovering. She was rebuilding. And while Kale's world deteriorated, hers was taking shape again, stronger than before. Dr. Mensah's words echoed in her mind from an earlier session. Healing isn't about erasing what happened. It's about reclaiming who you are in spite of it. Amina understood now. She wasn't trying to go back to the woman she was before Kale. That woman was too trusting, too willing to ignore red flags, too desperate to believe love could fix everything. The woman she was becoming was wiser, more careful, more aware of her own worth. She wouldn't let anyone make her feel small again. Days turned into weeks, and Amina's routine solidified. Morning walks, therapy sessions, afternoons spent reviewing financial documents with advisors who treated her with respect, who explained every detail patiently, who gave her control over decisions that affected her future. She met with a lawyer to discuss her options regarding the baby, ensuring that legal protections were in place so Kale could never claim custody or use the child as leverage. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Okafor, reassured her. Given the documented abuse, the theft, and the ongoing investigation, you have strong grounds for full custody and a restraining order if needed. Amina felt relief wash over her. Her baby would be safe, protected, free from the chaos Kale created. One evening, as she sat in the garden watching the sunset, Zephyr joined her. He sat quietly for a moment before speaking. "You're different," he said. It wasn't a question. Amina smiled faintly. "I had to be." Zephyr studied her profile. "You know he's trying to reach you, right?" "Kale. He's been attempting to find ways to contact you." Amina's smile faded. "I figured he would." Zephyr's voice hardened. "He won't get through. We've made sure of that. But I wanted you to know he's desperate. People do dangerous things when they're desperate." Amina turned to him, her eyes clear. "I'm not afraid of him anymore, Zephyr. He took everything he could from me. There's nothing left for him to take." Zephyr nodded slowly, pride flickering across his face. "Good. Because the woman I'm looking at right now, she's stronger than he ever was." While Amina reclaimed her voice, Kale's world continued to crumble. Former friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Social media buzzed with speculation and judgment. Investors demanded repayment for losses tied to his mismanagement. Leora, true to form, vanished from his life entirely, blocking his calls and scrubbing her social media of any trace of their relationship. Kale found himself alone in a way he never imagined possible. Not the isolation he inflicted on Amina, but the kind born from consequences he couldn't manipulate his way out of. He tried everything. Damage control statements that only made things worse. Meetings with lawyers who told him the evidence was damning. Attempts to access hidden accounts that were already frozen. Every door he tried to open slammed shut in his face. And through it all, one thought haunted him. Where was Amina? Who was protecting her? How had she become untouchable when he had worked so hard to make her powerless? Amina, however, chose not to track his downfall. She didn't need to. Her focus was on her child and the life she still intended to live. She started sketching again, something she hadn't done since before she met Kale. Simple drawings at first, flowers, landscapes, abstract patterns. But gradually, the sketches became more intentional. Designs for a small business concept she had once dismissed. Ideas for a space where women like her could find support, resources, and community. She shared the sketches with her brothers one evening over dinner. Ariane studied them carefully, then looked up at her with pride. "This is brilliant, Amina. You should do this." She hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready." Cade's voice was firm. "You'll never feel completely ready. But you're strong enough. And we'll support you every step of the way." Zephyr grinned. "Besides, you've already survived the hardest part. Building something new? That's going to be easy compared to what you've already overcome." Amina looked at her brothers, feeling gratitude swell in her chest. They had saved her, yes. But more than that, they had reminded her that she was worth saving, that her dreams mattered, that her voice deserved to be heard. And as she sat there, surrounded by people who genuinely loved her, she realized something profound. Kale's greatest failure wasn't the theft or the cruelty or the lies. It was believing that breaking her would be permanent. Because she wasn't broken. She was rebuilding. And the life she was creating, brick by brick, choice by choice, breath by breath, was entirely her own. The brothers never intended for Amina's suffering to become a spectacle, but the truth had a way of slipping through cracks, even carefully controlled ones. It began when a journalist reached out with suspicions regarding Kale's sudden financial collapse. The reporter, a woman named Sandra Mills, had been tracking financial irregularities in local businesses and noticed patterns that didn't add up. She contacted Ariane's office, requesting an interview about the ongoing investigation. Ariane rejected the request politely, his tone firm but professional. "My sister's privacy is not up for discussion. If you have questions about financial crimes, direct them to the authorities handling the case." Sandra respected the boundary, but continued digging, sensing there was more to the story than frozen accounts and business audits. Zephyr, noticing the growing online curiosity about Cale's downfall, traced the leak to one of Cale's own associates, a man named Derek who had panicked under investigation and started talking to anyone who would listen, hoping to distance himself from the fallout. The story spread faster than anyone expected. Not the personal details, not the violence, not the humiliation. Amina's privacy remained protected by her brother's careful management, but the documented fraud, the stolen assets, and the illegal transfers painted Cale in a damning spotlight that grew brighter with each passing day. Headlines appeared across local news sites. Businessman accused of embezzling from wife's inheritance. Financial fraud investigation expands as more victims come forward. Former partners claim pattern of deception spanning years. Each article chipped away at the image Cale had worked so hard to build, revealing the rot beneath the polished surface. As the story gained traction, Leora attempted to distance herself publicly, releasing carefully rehearsed statements through her publicist. "I had no knowledge of Mr. Cale's financial misconduct and am cooperating fully with investigators. I was misled just as much as anyone else." But the internet was unforgiving. Screenshots surfaced, messages between Leora and Cale discussing transfers, jewelry sales, and strategies to keep certain transactions hidden. Receipts emerged showing her direct involvement in spending money that didn't belong to them. Her carefully crafted innocence crumbled under the weight of evidence she couldn't deny. Amina watched it all unfold from a distance. Her brothers shielded her from the worst of the noise, filtering updates so she only saw what was necessary, never the cruel speculation or invasive commentary that always accompanied public scandals. But she saw enough to understand that karma had simply arrived wearing armor stronger than her own anger. She didn't feel joy at Cale's downfall, only a strange, hollow emptiness. He had taken so much from her, stolen pieces of her identity she was still trying to reclaim, but she refused to let him take her peace as well. Instead, she focused on her baby's health checkups, attending appointments where doctors confirmed everything was progressing well, where nurses smiled and asked about names and nursery colors. She focused on the gentle rhythm of her new life, morning tea in the garden, therapy sessions that peeled back layers of trauma, quiet dinners with her brothers where laughter slowly returned to her voice. The media storm raged outside her world like a hurricane she no longer belonged to. Within her sanctuary, she existed in quiet recovery, aware that the world now whispered a truth she had once been too afraid to speak. Cale, meanwhile, spiraled. His business partners severed all connections, releasing public statements that condemned his actions and emphasized their own ignorance of his crimes. His name became synonymous with manipulation and deceit, mentioned in cautionary articles about financial abuse and red flags in relationships. Investors demanded compensation he didn't have, threatening lawsuits that piled up faster than he could count. His lawyer advised him to stay silent, to avoid making statements that could be used against him in court, but Cale couldn't help himself. He posted a rambling defense on social media, claiming he was being framed, that jealous competitors were destroying his reputation, that the woman accusing him, though he never named Amina, was lying for attention. The post backfired spectacularly. Comments flooded in, dissecting every word, pointing out inconsistencies, sharing links to evidence that contradicted his claims. Within hours, the post was deleted, but screenshots lived forever, circulating across platforms as proof of his desperation. Leora disappeared when he needed her most, leaving him to face consequences alone. She moved to another city, changed her social media handles, and began reinventing herself as a victim of Cale's manipulation rather than his accomplice. But the internet had a long memory. Every time she tried to restart her modeling career, old screenshots resurfaced. Every time she posted about new beginnings, comments reminded her of stolen jewelry and forged signatures. Her career stalled, trapped in the shadow of choices she couldn't escape. Kale tried to shift the blame onto Amina, drafting messages he never sent, rehearsing explanations that fell apart under scrutiny. But he had no access to her, no influence, no ground to stand on. Every attempt to contact her was blocked. Every effort to find her location was thwarted. Her brothers had built walls around her, so secure that Kale couldn't even confirm she still lived in the same state. For the first time, the man who once believed he owned every outcome found himself powerless. The life he tried to build at the expense of someone else was dissolving in front of him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. One evening, as Amina sat reading in the library, Ariane entered quietly and sat across from her. "There's something you should know," he said carefully. Amina looked up, sensing the weight in his tone. "The story went public. Not your story. Your privacy is intact, but Kale's crimes. It's everywhere now." Amina set her book down slowly. "How public?" Ariane pulled out his phone and showed her a news segment from a local station. The anchor discussed financial fraud cases, using Kale's situation as a primary example. His photo appeared on screen, followed by legal analysts discussing potential charges and prison time. Amina watched silently, her expression unreadable. When the segment ended, she handed the phone back. "Good," she said simply. Ariane studied her face. "You're okay with this?" She nodded. "He made choices, Ariane. Choices that hurt me and probably hurt others. If the world knows what he did, maybe it'll stop him from doing it again." Ariane's respect for his sister deepened. "You're handling this better than I expected." Amina smiled faintly. "I'm not handling it. I'm just refusing to let it consume me. There's a difference." Zephyr joined them, carrying a tablet. "You might want to see this too. People are reaching out, other women who say Kale manipulated them financially or emotionally. They're asking if there's a way to hold him accountable." Amina's breath caught. She wasn't the only one. Of course she wasn't. Men like Kale didn't suddenly become abusive. They practiced. They refined their methods. They left trails of broken people behind them. "What do they need?" Amina asked. Zephyr set the tablet down. "Legal advice. Support. Someone who understands what they went through." Amina looked at her brothers, then at the messages on the screen. Strangers sharing their pain, seeking validation, hoping for justice. Something shifted inside her. She had spent weeks focused on her own healing, and rightfully so. But maybe her experience could serve a larger purpose. Maybe the pain Kale inflicted could be transformed into something that helped others escape similar traps. "Connect me with them," Amina said quietly. Ariane leaned forward. "Are you sure? This could be overwhelming." She met his eyes, her voice steady. "I'm sure. If my story can help even one person recognize the signs earlier than I did, then maybe some good can come from this nightmare." Cade entered the room, his expression grim. Kale's lawyer just filed a motion claiming emotional distress and defamation. He's trying to argue that the public exposure has damaged his mental health and business prospects. Amina almost laughed at the irony. The man who destroyed her emotional well-being was now claiming victimhood, because people found out what he did. Zephyr shook his head in disgust. "The motion won't go anywhere. He has no grounds. But it shows how desperate he's getting." Ariane's voice was cold. "Let him file whatever he wants. Every motion he files creates more documentation of his behavior. He's building our case for us." Amina stood, walking to the window and looking out at the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Kale was scrambling, grasping at straws, trying to regain control he never truly had. But he was fighting shadows now, consequences that couldn't be manipulated away. She turned back to her brothers. "I don't want to see him suffer. I just want him to stop hurting people." Cade's voice was matter-of-fact. "He will. Because after this, no one will trust him again." The truth was out, and it couldn't be buried. Kale's downfall wasn't dramatic. It was inevitable. And as Amina stood surrounded by her brothers, by the safety they provided and the future they helped her rebuild, she realized something profound. She had survived. Not just the abuse, not just the betrayal, but the aftermath. The hardest part wasn't the night he threw her out. It was the weeks that followed, when she had to decide who she would become in the wake of devastation. And she chose strength. She chose healing. She chose to let the truth speak for itself, while she focused on building a life worth living. Kale's name would fade eventually, buried under newer scandals and forgotten headlines. But Amina's story, the one she was writing now, one choice at a time, would continue long after his was over. Amina's recovery entered a new phase 3 weeks after the story broke, a turning point where healing no longer felt like a response to pain, but an active decision to reclaim her identity. She sat across from Dr. Helena Marsh, a trauma specialist her brothers had carefully selected, in a sunlit office that smelled faintly of lavender and felt nothing like the sterile clinical spaces she had imagined. "Tell me about the moment you realized you had lost yourself," Dr. Marsh said gently, her pen poised above a leather notebook. Amina's hands rested on her growing belly, fingers tracing slow circles as she searched for words that had been buried for so long. "I stopped recognizing my own reflection," she began, her voice steady but soft. "Not because of the hair he let her cut, but because the woman staring back at me had learned to apologize for breathing. I became so small in his presence that I forgot I was ever meant to take up space." Dr. Marsh nodded, writing carefully. "And now, when you look at yourself now, what do you see?" Amina paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Someone learning to breathe again. Someone who survived something meant to destroy her. The therapist smiled, a genuine expression of respect that Amina felt in her chest. "That's not just survival, Amina. That's resistance." The sessions became a cornerstone of her new routine, each appointment peeling back layers of manipulation she hadn't fully understood while trapped inside it. Dr. Marsh helped her identify the patterns. How Kale had isolated her systematically, cutting off friends one by one with carefully planted seeds of doubt. How he had reframed her family's love as control. How he had positioned himself as her only safe harbor, while simultaneously creating the storms she needed shelter from. "He made you believe you were the problem," Dr. Marsh explained during one session, "so you would never question why the problems only existed around him." The clarity was both liberating and infuriating. Amina realized she had spent 2 years apologizing for reactions to abuse, believing her hurt feelings were character flaws, accepting blame for situations she never created. But now, as she pieced herself back together under Dr. Marsh's guidance, she saw not a broken woman, but a resilient one who had survived a calculated campaign meant to erase her. Each session brought small victories, learning to set boundaries without guilt, recognizing manipulation tactics, understanding that her compassion had never been a weakness, but rather the very thing Kale had weaponized because he lacked it himself. Her brothers gave her complete access to her restored accounts during a family meeting in Ariane's study, the afternoon light casting long shadows across mahogany furniture that spoke of generational wealth and protection. Zephyr spread financial documents across the desk with meticulous care, each page representing a piece of her life Kale had tried to steal. "Everything is back," he said, his voice carrying quiet satisfaction. "Your grandmother's inheritance, your personal savings, even the interest that should have accumulated. We also recovered the jewelry." Ariane opened a velvet-lined box, revealing pieces Amina thought she would never see again. Her grandmother's emerald ring, the gold bracelet passed down through 4 generations, earrings that had touched the ears of women who had fought their own battles and emerged victorious. Amina's hands trembled as she lifted the emerald ring, holding it up to the light and watching it sparkle with the same fire she remembered from childhood. "Grandmother used to tell me this ring had survived wars, migrations, and heartbreaks," she whispered, slipping it onto her finger where it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting to come home. "She said the women in our family were forged in fire, that we didn't break under pressure. We became diamonds." Cade, who had been standing quietly by the window, turned to face her. "She was right. You proved that." Amina looked at her three brothers, these men who had moved mountains to restore what was stolen, who had wrapped her in protection without smothering her independence, who had believed her when the world tried to make her doubt herself. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the depth of gratitude she felt. Ariane shook his head. "You're our sister. There's nothing to thank us for. This is what family does." That evening, Amina sat in the garden with a notebook she hadn't opened in years, one filled with half-finished poems and business ideas she had abandoned when Cale convinced her they were impractical distractions from being a good wife. She turned to a blank page and began to write, not poetry this time, but a business plan, something concrete, purposeful, something entirely hers. She had been thinking about it for days, an idea that had taken root during her conversations with the other women who reached out after Cale's crimes went public. What if she created a resource hub for women recovering from financial abuse? A place that offered legal guidance, financial literacy workshops, emotional support groups, and practical tools for rebuilding independence? She sketched out potential services, funding strategies, partnership opportunities with law firms and therapists, marketing approaches that would reach women still trapped in situations like the one she had escaped. The more she wrote, the more the vision solidified. This wasn't just about her healing anymore. This was about transforming her pain into a ladder other women could climb. When Zephyr found her hours later, still writing by lamplight with mosquitoes humming around the garden lights, he sat down beside her without interrupting. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, he finally spoke. "What are you working on?" She showed him the pages, watching his expression shift from curiosity to impressed understanding as he read. "This is brilliant, Amina. Have you thought about how you want to structure it? Nonprofit or social enterprise?" She hadn't gotten that far yet, but his question sparked new possibilities. Maybe both? A nonprofit arm for direct services, and a social enterprise that generates revenue to fund it. Zephyr grinned. "Now, you're thinking like an entrepreneur. Let's talk to Ariane about setting up meetings with lawyers and accountants. If you're serious about this, we can help you build something sustainable." Have you ever noticed how the worst moments of your life can become the foundation for your greatest purpose? Amina was discovering that truth in real time, watching her suffering transform into something that could prevent others from enduring the same. She spent the following weeks immersed in research, reaching out to organizations already working in this space, learning from their successes and failures, identifying gaps her platform could fill. She interviewed women who had escaped financial abuse, listening to their stories with the empathy of someone who intimately understood their fear, shame, and eventual triumph. Each conversation reinforced her resolve. One woman, Maria, had been trapped for 15 years before finally leaving with nothing but her children and the clothes on their backs. "I didn't even know how to open a bank account in my own name," Maria confessed during their video call. "He had controlled everything for so long that I felt like a child trying to navigate an adult world. I needed someone to hold my hand through every step, to tell me I wasn't stupid for not knowing things he had deliberately kept from me." Amina took notes, understanding exactly what Maria meant. "What would have helped you most in those early days?" she asked. Maria didn't hesitate. "A roadmap. Someone who had been there to tell me, do this first, then this, then this. And a community of women who wouldn't judge me for staying as long as I did." Amina added those elements to her plan, a step-by-step guide for leaving, a judgment-free community forum, mentorship pairing survivors further along in their healing with those just beginning. While Amina built her future, fragments of Cale's continuing downfall reached her despite her brother's attempts to filter the noise. His remaining assets were seized to cover restitution payments to Amina and other creditors. His business license was revoked pending criminal investigation. Former friends gave interviews distancing themselves, claiming they had always suspected something was wrong, but hadn't wanted to interfere. The collective abandonment was absolute and merciless. Leora's attempted reinvention failed spectacularly when a former colleague exposed text messages showing she had bragged about taking everything that weak woman had in reference to Amina. The screenshots went viral, destroying any remaining sympathy she might have garnered. She deleted all social media and disappeared from public view entirely, her modeling career permanently destroyed by her own cruelty coming to light. Amina heard these updates with decreasing interest, her investment in their suffering diminishing with each day she spent building something meaningful. She didn't need to watch them fall. She didn't need confessions or apologies. She simply needed them to be irrelevant to her future, which they increasingly were. One morning, as Amina reviewed financial projections for her organization with Cade, her phone buzzed with an email from Dr. Marsh containing a quote, "The opposite of trauma isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of purpose." Amina read it twice, feeling the truth settle into her bones. She was no longer defined by what Cale had done to her, but by what she was choosing to build despite it. Her greatest revenge wasn't his downfall. It was her refusal to let his cruelty define her trajectory. She was rising, not in opposition to him, but in absolute independence from him, creating a legacy that would outlive his relevance by decades. Cale's world collapsed with undeniable force on a Tuesday morning when federal agents appeared at his apartment with a warrant for his arrest. The charges read like a catalog of everything he thought he had gotten away with: wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, embezzlement, and financial exploitation. His hands shook as they cuffed him, the metal cold against his wrists, the reality of consequences finally breaking through the delusion that he could talk his way out of anything. His neighbors watched from doorways and windows, some recording on their phones, their judgment palpable in the morning air. The man who once walked through life believing he was untouchable was now being led to a police car in handcuffs. His fall from grace documented in real time by people who had once envied his apparent success. At the station, Detective Morris sat across from him in an interrogation room that smelled of stale coffee and broken promises. "You want to tell me your side of the story?" Morris asked, his tone neither kind nor cruel, just professionally indifferent. Cale tried to summon the charm that had carried him through countless manipulations, but his voice cracked when he spoke. "This is all a misunderstanding. My wife, ex-wife, she's bitter about the separation. Her brothers have money and influence. They're using it to destroy me because I chose to move on." Morris slid a folder across the table, opening it to reveal bank statements, forged signatures, transfer receipts, and timestamps that painted an irrefutable picture. "These documents say otherwise. We've got you stealing from your wife's inheritance while she was pregnant, forging her signature on loan applications, transferring funds to your mistress's accounts, and selling jewelry that didn't belong to you. That's not a bitter ex-wife, Mr. Cale. That's evidence." Cale stared at the papers, watching his lies disintegrate under the weight of proof he couldn't deny. His lawyer, a public defender named Craig who looked exhausted before the meeting even started, laid out the situation with brutal honesty during their first private consultation. The prosecution has everything they need. Multiple witnesses, forensic accounting, digital trails, victims beyond your ex-wife willing to testify. You're looking at significant prison time unless you take a plea deal. Cale's chest tightened, panic flooding his system. A plea deal? I didn't do anything that bad. We had financial problems, I made some mistakes, but I never meant to hurt anyone. Craig's expression hardened. You systematically stole from a pregnant woman, isolated her from her family, forged legal documents, and when she had nothing left, you threw her out on the street. The prosecution is going to paint you as a predator who targeted a vulnerable woman, and honestly, the evidence supports that narrative. If this goes to trial, you'll lose, and the sentence will be worse. The words hit Cale like physical blows, each one stripping away another layer of the false reality he had constructed. For years, he had rewritten his own actions in his mind, casting himself as the victim of circumstances, the misunderstood man trying to build a better life. But sitting in that office with evidence stacked against him and a lawyer telling him to prepare for prison, he could no longer hide from the truth. He had destroyed someone who loved him, and now the debt had come due. Authorities froze every account connected to him. Business audits exposed years of mismanagement that extended beyond Amina to other investors and partners he had deceived. His attempts to make public statements only worsened his situation, as each lie was quickly dismantled by people who had kept receipts, screenshots, and recordings. One former business partner, Marcus, gave an interview to a local news station that went viral overnight. Cale presented himself as a self-made success story, but everything was smoke and mirrors. He borrowed money he never intended to repay, used one investor's funds to pay off another, and when things started falling apart, he blamed everyone but himself. I lost $50,000 trusting him, and I'm not the only one. The interview ended with Marcus looking directly into the camera. If you've been burned by this man, come forward. There's strength in numbers, and he needs to be held accountable. Within days, 6 more people contacted authorities with similar stories, each one adding weight to the prosecution's case. Cale tried contacting Leora, desperate for any form of support, but her number was disconnected. He tried her social media, but she had blocked him everywhere. The woman who had stood beside him while he humiliated his wife, who had spent stolen money without question, who had celebrated their new beginning online, had vanished the moment consequences arrived. The glamorous partnership they flaunted dissolved under pressure, revealing their alliance had been nothing more than mutual convenience built on someone else's suffering. He attempted to track Amina down, convincing himself that if he could just talk to her, explain himself, maybe even apologize, he might regain some control over the narrative spiraling away from him. But every avenue was blocked with surgical precision. Her old number belonged to someone else now. Her email bounced back as undeliverable. Her social media accounts were deleted or set to private with usernames he couldn't find. He tried reaching out to mutual acquaintances, but they either ignored him or told him bluntly to leave her alone. One former friend, Rachel, actually called him back, but not with the help he hoped for. Are you seriously trying to contact Amina after what you did to her? Rachel's voice was sharp with disgust. You held her down while your mistress cut her hair, Cale. You threw a pregnant woman out on the street. You stole from her, lied to her, isolated her, and broke her. And now you want access to her? For what? So you can manipulate her one more time. Cale stumbled over his words. I just want to explain. Rachel cut him off. There's nothing to explain. You made your choices. Now deal with the consequences like an adult instead of a coward. The line went dead, leaving Cale alone with the reality that he had burned every bridge and destroyed every relationship that might have offered him refuge. Have you ever wondered what goes through the mind of someone who finally realizes they can't escape what they've done? Cale sat in his mother's basement, the only place that would take him in after he made bail, staring at his phone and scrolling through old photos of himself and Amina. In the pictures, she smiled at the camera with genuine warmth, her eyes bright with the kind of trust that only comes from believing you're loved. He remembered that version of her, the woman who had cooked his favorite meals, who had supported his business ideas even when they failed, who had defended him to her family when they raised concerns. When had he decided that woman deserved cruelty instead of care? He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, which disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. The transformation had been gradual, each small act of disrespect leading to larger ones, each boundary crossed making the next violation easier. He had convinced himself she was a problem, too sensitive, too demanding, too close to her family, when the truth was simpler and more damning. He was the problem. He had always been the problem. And now, confronted by the wreckage of his choices, he understood something that came far too late. Amina hadn't been weak for loving him. He had been weak for betraying that love. Cale underestimated the power of the brothers, who now stood between him and his former victim. Ariane had connections in legal circles that ensured every document was filed correctly, every deadline met, every loophole closed. Zephyr had financial expertise that tracked every stolen cent and calculated restitution down to the penny. Cade had investigative skills that uncovered patterns of behavior spanning years, connecting Cale's treatment of Amina to a history of manipulation that predated their relationship. Together, they built a case so airtight that Cale's lawyer advised him to take the plea deal or face decades in prison. Every lie Cale had told was cataloged, every threat documented, every stolen dollar traced back to accounts bearing his fingerprints. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of being outmatched, outpowered, and outmaneuvered by people who understood that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring he could never do this to anyone else. Amina heard of Kale's arrest through Ariane, who delivered the news while she was sketching logo designs for her organization in the sunroom. They arrested him this morning. He'll likely take a plea deal within the month. Amina set down her pencil and looked out at the garden, where flowers bloomed in defiant color. How do you feel about that? Ariane asked carefully. She considered the question with the same thoughtfulness she brought to everything now. I feel nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, just nothing. He's not my problem anymore. He's the legal system's problem. Ariane studied his sister, impressed by her clarity. You've come a long way. She smiled faintly. I had good guides. The conversation ended there, and Amina returned to her designs, her focus already back on building rather than dwelling. Kale's arrest was simply a footnote in a chapter she had already closed. Amina requested a meeting on the first day of her 8th month of pregnancy, gathering her brothers and Dr. Marsh in Ariane's study to discuss something she had been processing for weeks. The room felt sacred in its quiet, afternoon light streaming through tall windows and casting geometric patterns across Persian rugs that had witnessed generations of family decisions. She sat in a leather chair that still felt too big for her frame, her hands resting protectively on her belly where the baby kicked with increasing frequency, as if reminding her that 2 lives depended on the choices she made now. I need to talk about closure, she began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to say. Not revenge, not confrontation, just resolution on my terms. Ariane leaned forward, his expression immediately protective. What kind of resolution? Amina met his eyes without flinching. I want to forgive him. The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples of surprise across her brothers' faces. Zephyr spoke first, his tone careful but confused. Forgive Kale? After everything he did to you? She nodded slowly, knowing this would be the hardest part to explain. Not for his sake, for mine. I've been carrying this weight, anger, betrayal, humiliation, and it's exhausting. Every time I think about what he did, I feel chains wrapping tighter around my chest. Forgiveness isn't about saying what he did was okay. It's about refusing to let him keep hurting me from a distance. Dr. Marsh, who had been listening quietly, spoke with professional insight. Amina and I have been working through this for several sessions. She understands that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation or forgetting. It means releasing the emotional debt she's been trying to collect from someone who can never pay it. Cade, always the most analytical, crossed his arms and studied his sister with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex equation. So what does this forgiveness actually look like? Because if you're thinking about contact with him, I need you to understand how dangerous that could be. Amina shook her head firmly. No contact. That's not what I want. I'm filing all necessary legal papers to finalize the separation once the baby arrives, and I'm requesting permanent no-contact measures. He'll have no parental rights, no visitation, no avenue to reach me or my child. The forgiveness is internal, something I do in my own heart so I can move forward without dragging his shadow behind me. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. I've realized something important through therapy. Kale didn't just steal money and jewelry from me. He stole my ability to trust my own judgment. He made me doubt every instinct, question every feeling, second-guess every decision until I became paralyzed by the fear of being wrong. That's what I'm forgiving, not the abuse itself, but my own guilt for not seeing it sooner, for staying as long as I did, for believing someone could love me while systematically destroying me. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, vulnerability breaking through the composure she had maintained. Zephyr moved closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. You have nothing to feel guilty about. You were manipulated by someone who made it his mission to trap you. She looked up at him with gratitude. I know that intellectually, but emotionally, I've been blaming myself for not being smarter, stronger, more suspicious. Dr. Marsh helped me see that manipulation thrives where compassion lives. And my compassion was never my weakness. It was my gift. Cale weaponized it, but that doesn't make it something I should be ashamed of. Ariane remained silent longer than his brothers, his jaw working as he processed what his sister was saying. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone wrestling with conflicting instincts. I want justice, so complete it leaves no room for mercy. I want him to suffer the way you suffered, to feel every ounce of pain he inflicted multiplied by 1,000. And you're telling me you want to forgive him? Amina met his intensity with calm certainty. I'm telling you that your version of justice won't heal me. The legal system is handling accountability. He's facing charges. He's losing everything. He'll likely go to prison. That's enough. What I need now isn't more punishment for him. It's freedom for me. And I can't be free if I'm still emotionally tethered to hating him. The truth in her words cut through Ariane's resistance like light through darkness. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly as he began to understand that her decision wasn't softness, but rather a form of strength he hadn't considered. This is really what you need, he asked quietly. She nodded. It is. I need to close this chapter completely, and I can't do that if I'm still waiting for him to feel remorse he's incapable of feeling or hoping for an apology that will never come. I'm choosing peace over justice, and I need you to respect that choice even if you don't agree with it. Have you ever had to choose between the satisfaction of revenge and the serenity of letting go? Dr. Marsh spoke into the thoughtful silence that followed. What Amina is doing requires more courage than seeking revenge. Revenge is easy. It's a natural response to harm. But choosing to release someone from the debt they owe you, especially when they've taken so much, that's a level of emotional maturity most people never reach. She's not saying Cale deserves forgiveness. She's saying she deserves freedom from the burden of carrying unforgiveness. Cade nodded slowly, beginning to see the wisdom in his sister's approach. So this forgiveness, it's not about him at all. It's entirely about you. Amina smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Exactly. He doesn't get access to this decision. He doesn't get to know about it, benefit from it, or use it to absolve himself. This is something I'm doing in the privacy of my own healing, and it stays there. Zephyr asked the practical question that needed answering. What about the legal proceedings? The restraining order, the custody situation, the restitution payments? She had already thought through every detail. All of that proceeds exactly as planned. Forgiveness doesn't mean I trust him or allow him back into my life in any capacity. It just means I'm not going to spend my energy hating him. The lawyers handle the legal side, and I focus on building a life so full of purpose and joy that he becomes irrelevant. The meeting ended with Amina's brothers agreeing to support her decision, though Ariane made her promise one thing. If you ever change your mind, if you ever need us to pursue additional legal action or increase security measures, you tell us immediately. Your forgiveness is yours to give, but our protection is ours to provide. And that doesn't stop just because you found peace. She agreed without hesitation, understanding that their need to protect her was as much about their own healing as hers. In the days that followed, Amina worked with her legal team to file all necessary documents. The separation papers were comprehensive, outlining no contact provisions, termination of parental rights pending Cale's criminal conviction, and structured restitution payments that would continue regardless of his incarceration. Her lawyer, Patricia Chun, reviewed every clause with meticulous attention. This is one of the most airtight separation agreements I've drafted, Patricia said with professional satisfaction. He'll have no grounds to contest any of it, especially given the criminal charges and evidence of abuse. You're protecting yourself and your child in every possible way. Amina signed the documents with a steady hand, each signature representing another door closing on a past that no longer had power over her future. That evening, she sat alone in the garden where she had spent so many hours processing her trauma and imagining her recovery. The sky turned purple and orange with sunset, birds settling into trees for the night, the world transitioning from day to darkness with a kind of natural grace she was learning to embody in her own life. She thought about Cale in whatever cell or courtroom he now occupied, wondered briefly if he understood yet what he had lost, then released even that curiosity into the fading light. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a single moment, but a practice. A daily choice to redirect her thoughts away from past harm and toward future possibility. Some days would be easier than others, but the decision itself was made, and with it came a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She placed her hands on her belly and spoke to the child who would never know the man who helped create her, but would grow up surrounded by the kind of love Amina once thought she had, but now understood she was only beginning to discover. "You're going to grow up in a world where you're protected, valued, and free," she whispered. "And I'm going to make sure you never settle for anything less than you deserve." The baby kicked in response, a flutter of life that felt like agreement, like promise, like the future announcing itself with gentle insistence. Amina stood, brushing grass from her dress, and walked back toward the house where her brothers waited with dinner and conversation and the kind of normalcy she was rebuilding one moment at a time. She had survived the worst someone could do to her, and now she was choosing the best way to move forward, unshackled, unburdened, and unbroken. Months later, Amina stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new home, one she had chosen herself after weeks of searching for a space that felt like freedom rather than shelter, and whispered to her newborn daughter that the world was full of second chances. The baby, whom she had named Zara after her grandmother, slept peacefully against her chest. Tiny fingers curled around the fabric of Amina's shirt with a kind of trust that both terrified and inspired her. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the hardwood floors she had picked out, illuminating walls she had painted in soft colors that made her feel calm rather than caged. This house belonged to her completely, purchased with her restored inheritance, designed according to her preferences, filled with furniture she selected without anyone questioning her choices or making her feel small for having opinions. In the living room, her brothers assembled a bookshelf with a kind of focused concentration that made her smile, their quiet conversation punctuated by the occasional curse when pieces didn't fit together as expected. "Ariane, you're holding the wrong panel," Zephyr said with barely contained amusement. Ariane looked down at the instruction manual with exaggerated confusion. "These diagrams make no sense. Who designed this torture device?" Cade laughed, taking the manual from his older brother. "It's Swedish furniture, not rocket science. Let me handle this before you break something." Watching them work together, bickering with the ease of men who had spent a lifetime navigating each other's personalities, Amina felt gratitude so deep it ached in her chest. These men had saved her when she couldn't save herself, had believed her when the world tried to make her doubt her own reality, had stood between her and destruction without ever making her feel like a burden. Zara stirred in her arms, making the soft sounds newborns make when they're transitioning between sleep and waking, and Amina adjusted her position to sway gently, the motion instinctive and already familiar despite only 3 weeks of motherhood. She looked down at her daughter's face, studying features that somehow combined strength and delicacy, and made a silent promise that this child would never know the kind of love that required her to shrink, apologize, or disappear. "She's beautiful," a voice said from the doorway, and Amina turned to see Dr. Marsh standing there with a gift bag decorated with elephants and stars. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to see how you're adjusting to motherhood." Amina smiled warmly, gesturing for her therapist to come in. "I'm adjusting better than I expected. Exhausted, but in a good way. The kind of tiredness that comes from creating life instead of surviving trauma." Dr. Marsh set the gift bag on the coffee table and sat down, her professional demeanor softening into genuine affection. "That's a profound distinction. You've come so far from the woman I met 6 months ago." Amina thought back to that first session, to the version of herself who could barely speak without apologizing, who flinched at sudden movements, who believed she deserved everything that had happened to her. "I barely recognize that person anymore," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I would have found this strength without going through something so terrible. And then I realize that's the wrong question. The better question is, Now that I have this strength, what am I going to do with it? The answer to that question had taken shape faster than anyone anticipated. Amina's organization, which she named Reclaim Foundation, launched quietly 2 months after Zara's birth with a website, a hotline, and partnerships with 3 law firms willing to provide pro bono services to women escaping financial abuse. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within the first week, 47 women reached out seeking help, each one carrying a story that echoed elements of Amina's own experience. Stolen money, forged documents, systematic isolation, and the soul-crushing realization that someone they loved had been methodically destroying them. Amina couldn't personally respond to every request, but she built a team of volunteers, many of them survivors themselves, who understood that healing required both practical support and emotional validation. Maria, the woman who had been trapped for 15 years, became the volunteer coordinator, her organizational skills and deep empathy making her perfect for connecting women with the specific resources they needed. Together, they created workshops on financial literacy, legal rights, and recognizing manipulation tactics before they became inescapable traps. Have you ever wondered how many women are silently suffering right now, believing they're alone in their experience? The foundation's impact rippled outward faster than Amina could track, with women from neighboring states reaching out, asking if the services extended beyond local boundaries. Within 6 months, Reclaim Foundation had helped 83 women access legal representation, opened 14 bank accounts for those who had none in their own names, and provided emergency housing assistance to 11 families fleeing dangerous situations. Ariane, who had initially worried the foundation would drain his sister's emotional reserves during a time when she needed to focus on herself and her newborn, became its most vocal supporter after attending a volunteer training session and hearing the stories of women whose lives had been transformed by his sister's courage to speak up. "I had no idea how many people were going through this," he told Amina over dinner one evening, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose worldview had expanded uncomfortably. "Every woman who stood up and shared her story could have been you, could have been worse than you." And they all said the same thing. They felt like no one would believe them because their abuse didn't leave visible bruises. Amina nodded, feeding Zara with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to multitask out of necessity. That's what makes financial and emotional abuse so insidious. People don't see it, so they don't believe it's as damaging as physical violence. But having your identity stripped away, your resources stolen, your support system severed, that's violence too. It just doesn't leave scars you can photograph. Zephyr, who had been managing the foundation's finances with the same meticulous attention he brought to all his ventures, added his perspective. The women who reach out aren't looking for handouts. They're looking for someone to believe them and give them tools to rebuild. That's what makes this sustainable. You're not creating dependency, you're restoring independence. Cade raised his glass in a toast to Amina, who turned her worst nightmare into someone else's lifeline. Her business plans took shape with a kind of purposeful momentum that comes from clarity rather than desperation. Beyond the foundation, Amina developed a consulting service for companies wanting to train their HR departments on recognizing and responding to employees experiencing domestic or financial abuse. The first company to hire her was a tech firm whose CEO had watched his sister go through something similar and wanted to ensure his workplace could be a refuge rather than another space where victims felt unsafe. Amina delivered her first training to 60 employees, standing in front of them with Zara sleeping in a carrier against her chest, and spoke with the authority of someone who had lived what she was teaching. "Abuse doesn't stop when your employee clocks in for work," she explained, clicking through slides that outlined warning signs and intervention strategies. Financial abusers often monitor their victims' work emails, control their transportation, and sabotage their job performance to increase dependence. As employers, you have the power to notice these patterns and connect people with resources that could save their lives. The presentation ended with a standing ovation and requests for follow-up sessions, validation that her experience had value beyond her own healing. It had become a bridge helping others cross from danger to safety. Word of her work spread through networks she didn't know existed, reaching journalists who wanted to profile her story, podcasters who invited her for interviews, and conferences that requested her as a keynote speaker. She declined most of the attention, protective of her privacy and Zara's safety, but accepted select opportunities that aligned with her mission. One magazine interview, conducted in her home with careful agreements about what could and couldn't be photographed, captured her philosophy perfectly. "I don't want to be defined by what happened to me," she told the interviewer, a woman named Claire who had approached the story with unusual sensitivity. "I want to be defined by what I did after. Anyone can survive trauma. Not everyone chooses to transform it into purpose. That transformation is where the real power lies." The article titled "Rising After Ruin: One Woman's Journey from Victim to Visionary" featured a photo of Amina in her garden, Zara on her hip, surrounded by flowers she had planted herself, a visual metaphor for growth emerging from scorched earth. Cale faded into obscurity as legal consequences wrapped around him with the finality of a closing door. He accepted a plea deal that sentenced him to 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5, though the financial restitution orders would follow him far beyond his release. His name occasionally appeared in cautionary articles about financial predators, usually accompanied by the same unflattering mugshot that captured him at his lowest moment. Amina never spoke his name again, not because she was afraid of triggering painful memories, but because he had simply become irrelevant to the narrative she was writing. She had spent enough time in his shadow. The rest of her life would be lived in sunlight she created herself. Leora disappeared entirely, her social media presence erased, her modeling career a distant memory buried under the weight of her own complicity. Sometimes Amina wondered if Leora ever regretted standing in that living room with scissors, cutting away someone else's dignity for momentary power. Then she would remember that some people were incapable of regret, and she would release even that curiosity, choosing instead to focus on women who wanted to change rather than those who refused to acknowledge they needed to. As Amina sat rocking Zara to sleep one evening, her brothers, having finally finished assembling all the furniture and departed with promises to return for Sunday dinner, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been a woman with nothing. No money, no home, no hair, no hope. Now she owned a house, ran a foundation, had a daughter, and most importantly, possessed an unshakable certainty about her own worth that no one could ever take from her again. She looked around the room she had created, at the bookshelves filled with stories of women who had overcome impossible odds, at the photos of her brothers and grandmother, at the basement where Zara would sleep surrounded by safety and love. This was more than recovery. This was a renaissance. She had not regained her old life. She had built a new one from the ground up, stronger and brighter than anything she could have imagined during those dark nights when survival felt impossible. As she kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered promises about the future they would build together, Amina realized something profound that brought tears of joy rather than pain. She had not just survived the worst thing that ever happened to her. She had transformed it into the catalyst for becoming the best version of herself. And that transformation, that refusal to let cruelty define her destiny, was the truest victory she could have. Thanks for watching, and subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. May God bless you.